Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is Dr. Richard Alan Miller. Author and researcher, Dr. Richard Alan Miller reveals a depth of knowledge and experience in alternative agriculture, physics, and metaphysics. Miller began working in the secret world of Navy Intel, SEAL Corp, and then MRU in the late 60s, and now has amazing experiences and conclusions to share. Before many leading-edge concepts became trending topics, Miller was and is in the international front lines of research, experimentation, and documentation, and his website is www.richardalanmiller.com. And please welcome Richard to the show this evening. And Richard, how are you doing?
I'm going bald. That's always my stock response. Yeah. Unnatural causes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, but I got it done, so there it is.
All right. Yes, bravo. Congratulations on it. I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you coming on tonight.
No, I'm accessible.
Good. That's a good thing.
Good. Yeah.
And so what have you been working on? Why don't you fill us in on that?
Well, today was the Sovereign. I did an interview with Carrie Cassidy last year on the state of Fukushima, and I have now a series of articles on a skateboard rag that comes out of New York City called The Sovereign. And this was chapter 5 on the health of Japan, and I wrote about the children of Fukushima. It's really gross.
Oh, I can imagine. And where can people find this article?
I don't like to do that, but it's time everybody realizes this is not going away. It is getting worse. The children, 40% of the children over in Tokyo right now, in Tokyo, the prefect of Tokyo, have some kind of thyroid problem. 30, almost 38%, something like that. What happened is a bunch of the prefects did protocol studies on the children and, wiped them clean, said they were fine. And a lot of the parents didn't trust the government. And what they did is went into private hospitals. And now those private hospitals are coming out with reports that are quite startling.
That's too bad. Not surprising, though.
Well, we don't know. Right now, the way I ended this one is the children that live in and around about a 20-mile radius outside of the Fukushima closed limits now have to use a Geiger counter to determine whether they go out to play or they have to stay inside that day. And that's how that's at 20 times. Now, background from prior to Fukushima. And that's the deal. Even in the United States, the background levels have increased in some regions as high as 10%, 10 times. That means you're getting 10 times the radiation you were before Fukushima. Now, the big question is that dangerous? And candidly, the way I'm responding in this is we don't know. What we do know is that if it were 1,000 times, I'd wear a dosimetry badge. High energy physics. If it was 100 times, that would be like going through an airport with 9 X-rays. It's okay. Now they're saying that some children have received a lifetime dosage radiation. Any more background level, they are going to get cancer. It's a statistical thing. And it's kind of scary when you realize that the thyroid cancer in children that were born during or after Fukushima are right now, 40% of them are showing thyroid cancer or cysts.
That's not good.
Yeah, 2 years. It's way too soon.
I was going to say, yeah, that's pretty.
Yeah, that's, thyroid is a general indicator of body health. If something's going down, it'll also show in the thyroid. And thyroid cancer itself, if caught early enough, is treatable and almost 100%. However, the government was actually concealing information. Their excuse was they didn't know what the danger levels were afraid of the very thing that's happening, that the public is panicking, and individuals are having abortions because they're concerned that their child might be abnormal. And that's kind of like a over-response on the government's part, they think, to the public, not really knowing the truth. But everybody's different. Everybody's got their own values. And the bottom line is when you conceal, it automatically makes you suspect of why.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if people want to read this article, where can they find it again?
I'll post it on my website. You've got it. You can post that one. It goes in the Sovereign, which is a rag out of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
The Sovereign. You can find it online. It's for skateboarders, mostly kids that do not do computers. That's what I write for. Is that crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And there's batches of them, and they're young. The problem with these kids is that they don't really have good role models.
Mm-hmm.
The breakup of the family occurred. The school that they went to was inequipped to address their educational development needs socially, and they learned how to text rather than communicate. Mm-hmm. And today, the kids have no direction and no skills. Common Core has taken care of all of that. And here we have now a generation that are essentially lost in the equation. Mm-hmm. And really, what I'm trying to do is communicate to them on what they can do to, at least have some direction on purpose. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm really big at is I will say the only thing I know that you can take with you when you die is your education.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Yeah, that's what the article, that's the Sovereign.
Nice. Very good. Well, yeah, they're kind of like a Generation X, I guess you would call them that. I know people used to. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, it's each generation has its own things. The butt crack seems to be the Common Core today, where they're wearing their pants lower than I'm comfortable wearing mine. Well, it's a style, okay? And it's okay for uniqueness and tattooing and body piercing. Some of it's over the edge. I saw something on Facebook where they're getting their eyes tattooed. That's creepy.
Not good. That can't be healthy.
Well, really, it is a struggle for uniqueness and identity. Mm-hmm. That's what it's always been about. For us, for you, each generation, we have our own little things. Mine was hippie. I'm an old hippie. American graffiti, right out of the back.
With the love beads, too, right?
What's that?
Do you remember the love beads?
Oh, geez. I can tell you about free love and before herpes and socially transmitted diseases, yes.
Well, things have changed.
Rock festivals on acid, yes.
My goodness. Well, I know you have an extensive background in so many different areas and really respectable. And I did want to talk to you tonight a little bit about your occult background because I know that you're quite the adept when it comes to occultism. And I'd like you to elaborate insofar as when you got involved in all that.
I infiltrated OTO in 1970 for the military. And actually, I wasn't doing it for the military, just for the record. I was doing it because I was fascinated by it. Mm-hmm. And that's where, today it's people from the military are going in to spy on other people. Back then, I was a truth seeker. And magic was always reserved for the ultra elite of Europe for centuries. And so actually, a lot of the magic lodges have attracted intellectual curiosity. And it was those feeding grounds I was most interested in. And that's where I hung out. I started in 1970. Phyllis Seckler was my first teacher. She was the wife of Grady McMurtry, who was the caliphate after Crowley. And she and two other crones were known as the Witches of Endor. Yeah, just kidding. They were part of the Agape Lodge of North Hollywood in 1948. And she introduced me to Stanfield Jones up in Canada before he died. And I was very fortunate to get close to him. And then after his death, his widow up in Vancouver gave me his library. I knew McFarlane with 93 Publishing over in Toronto. There were always Lee Heflin was down in L.A. and there was Kenneth Anger, some of the others. And so I was an early player as a physicist. I am not Jack Parsons, and I'm not L. Ron Hubbard. I'm actually way higher in the lodge, and I'm probably one of the few this century that was also a physicist, a mathematician, a medical doctor, blah blah blah, and I'm still involved with magic.
Awesome.
It's a way of forming union with self. It's just one way, and it's well suited for me and my romance with the physical world as a physicist. So it works for me. It's extremely disciplined, and I would say that magic is like an advanced form of physics with a mystery school.
Right.
It's next century's physics.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's energy in motion without a doubt. And you're also learning to control, manipulate this energy to some degree. So what is the military's big interest in mysticism in general? Is it just about the concept of being able to do surveillance on a remote level?
Well, that's the least of it. The control fantasies. Good luck. That is, by the way, control is a fantasy. It's not real. You're just along for the ride, the ego part of it. And so there had been studies on how certain belief systems would allow you to do things you could not do with other more limited Christian beliefs, for example. Now, that didn't mean you had to get rid of your Christian beliefs, but the belief was arbitrary, and actually, knowing that, you could use it as a tool to complete your end. If you were a staunch Christian and tried to go into Iraq, probably get yourself killed. And so while you might be a Christian, it would be like that pair of bell-bottom pants I folded up and put away in my drawer. I'll never throw it away. A belief system sometimes is very comfortable. Unfortunately, I'll never also ever fit in those pair of pants again.
Yeah. Bell-bottoms are great, though. Well,
yeah, it's from the 60s, with beads and all of it. It's right there.
I remember all that. I mean, I was growing up, I was young, but my mother and, they were kind of hippies, I guess.
Well, I was born in 1944, so I'm 70 and lived it. I went to rock concerts where Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison actually peed on the stage. I was there. I saw it.
What a mess, huh?
Well,
times have changed. Hendrix. I don't know if they have or not, though. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, no, I saw Jimi Hendrix at the Monterey Jazz Festival in '67. Right behind him, the Byrds came on and did 8 Miles High. Imagine where everybody went with that one. Yeah. And then see all of California, down near Monterey and all of that. That's in the Humboldt area where, Morning Glory Zell died this last week. Yeah. And Tim and Morning Glory have lived in Ukiah for almost 30 years. They have a big nest. They started in 69 or 68, the Church of All Worlds, based on Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. They're generally associated with starting the neo-pagan movement in America, and had a journal that's now 44 years in print called Green Egg. And I write for Green Egg. I wrote for it in the first issues, and now I'm still writing for it 40-some years later. Morning Glory died this last week. She and Tim were the ones that... He goes by Oberon Ravenheart now, but, it's Tim Zell.
Very interesting. What kind of articles do you write for them?
The last one was the dodecahedral universe. I, in magic circles, have a nickname. They have me nicknamed in different ones. Like I'm known as the postman in the military, but because of my networking rural communities and bunkers. But they call me in Europe, I'm known as the follower. And that comes out of the second book of the law with Aleister Crowley. It was written in 1902, when he, in there, it said, add, divide, multiply, and understand, and one will follow. And what that was, they used to think it was my teacher, Freder Akkad, that did the anatomy of the body of God, which was the tree of life in 3 dimensions, and in 2 dimensions, excuse me. And what I did was write the paper N = 50, V = 6 with my ex-wife Iona, and that became the legend of completing the mathematical equation on the Necker cube of space. And that was out of Merkaba mysticism, and it was part of the vector equilibrium matrix and the books that we wrote on video feedback called The Diamond Body electromagic, and yogatronics. And these were the original studies that I did from the military on how to simulate any drug experience, including ketamine, telepathy, and BZ, using sound and light. I could talk to specific neurotransmitters. And that became the new system of magic, because previous, with Aleister Crowley, it was to use drugs. Now, magic is the art of changing consciousness at will. And so obviously the use of drugs alters your consciousness, truly. And so that is a form of magic, literally. And if you do it without preparation or set and setting, as Leary would call it, then you did not have a way to assimilate the experience, and it was just for recreation. It wasn't like you were really doing anything significant on other planes. Mm-hmm. And pathworking is the ability to direct your thought toward changing reality, changing a movie. And that's what I started writing about. And what I did is move magic forward to now I can do almost any state of consciousness using video feedback systems with sound and light.
Very interesting. And that, of course, was something that you developed when you were, I guess, contracted with the military, or no?
Yeah, I was a GS-18. Can you imagine? I was working with 2-star generals and had higher clearance. So, not 4-star, 2-star generals. And I worked with bird colonels. And basically, because of my eclectic backgrounds, I was useful in areas of expertise, that a lot of physicists didn't have. And my interest in meta meaning beyond physics. In other words, having a worldview where the physical world is a subset. A special application, not, for the whole thing in general. And when you have a larger worldview, what happens next is you have more access to the world.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And what about the intent? What if your intent is malicious in some way? Would you say that you don't have as much access?
Well, that's an interesting question. Intent is the bottom line, and that's what structures the water. And so, your prayer and the way you put your intent into matter. Now, if it's malicious, who made that determination? It would appear sometimes that someone's purpose is quite different and counterpositioned with your own. And the correct approach to that is not to make judgment of maliciousness, but do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. That means you're open and friendly and do not make judgment on another man unless it deters you from your own purpose, in which case that's more important. And really, that's one of the main problems with a lot of the religions, is that they make too much judgment in terms of insecurity about their own pathwork and trying to, make sure everybody believes that we're all the same, because, then I have the assurance that I'm right. And by the way, the correct metaphor on that is I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. And so that's where the responsibility comes in, taking responsibility for the thoughts you choose to entertain. And if the intent is off color, to witness that and see that it's not working. The way you can do this, Solaris, is the universe wants you to do what you're supposed to do. And you can do it kicking and screaming, or you can flow. And of course, all the saints in history have talked about finding that moment of timelessness where it's not measured in time and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And when you're in that, you enter a place called sacred time over the profane, and the universe wants that to happen. In other words, you are like Buddha and you have the mountain come to you.
Yeah, well said. And of course, a lot of everybody has a real, I guess it would be kind of a misperception about Aleister Crowley. And what do you have to say about all that? I mean, everybody's
the beast himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, it's true. A teacher can only take you as far as they themselves have been. And Crowley did die as a drug addict in Hastings in 1948. So that's one of the reasons I'm not specifically a Crowleyite, although the man deserves his due. He was a genius. You have to realize that at the turn of the century, it was Victorian, and that the way you got your point across is by shocking everybody. Mm-hmm. So I'll just go ahead and tattoo 666 in my forehead in 1924 and try to offend as many people as I can. That was Aleister Crowley. He was extremely bright. I sent you an exam. That is for the Argenum Argenum, Order of the Silver Star, what you would call today's version of Illuminati, illuminated beings. Crowley had an inner lodge as well as the outer lodge. The outer lodge was the Ordo Templi Orientis, or Order of the Temple of the Orient. And basically, it's around Tantric Yoga, the secret, Masonic secret. The thought that occurs at the moment of climax happens. And so that's what it is. And of course, if you're having visions of other men while you're making love to your partner, that will happen. That's how it works. And so you have to be very mindful of your emotional content and how it's directed.
Well, isn't it about really transcending from the lower chakra to the crown chakra and beyond? So I would say you're transcending all of your energy centers to the highest level.
Well, that's an Eastern way of looking at it. Yes. Well, no, it's valid. Chakras came out of Hindu mysticism and the Merkaba. But, there are anagrams, or whatever they call, not anagrams, metaphors, where, Yesod, mastery of emotion, not Earth, Malkuth, but Yesod, for example, was your gonads. And your heart is being able to have union with self. That's like Christ consciousness. And then Kether, of course, was having union with God, or God consciousness. And in the tree of life, it's interesting. If you really take a closer look at things, you'll notice there is a hierarchy of gods above our God Kether. And they're called the Veils of Isis, which is Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Ur. And if you can't get around that metaphor, you could go to Bob Dylan when he's saying everybody's got to serve somebody. In other words, there's good aliens and bad aliens and ugly aliens. And there's a hierarchy out there. And we're down in the food chain, probably metaphorically at 4th grade. Have no clue what 5th grade's going to hold.
That's very interesting. So you feel like there's definitely a certain race or species that kind of holds the evolution of mankind back on a spiritual level, or no?
Well, no, I'm not going to say that. Mankind might be holding himself back in that if I were an alien, where would I hide in plain sight? Well, we now talk about the draconian bloodlines and that 4th gene, which makes it Homo sapiens sapiens, where there is a non-human element gene that nobody can account for where it came from. And so with that said, the war for Earth could metaphorically be stated as it's a war going on inside yourself. And you have choice. That's what made you God's favorite. And what the bad aliens, let's go using your metaphor, might be doing is distracting you. Because, in fact, I'm guessing that if they're trying to do that, there are rules of engagement with good aliens or law enforcement, probably. They have to do it a certain way. And that means you individually have a choice to make. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. That's the really interesting part. Whether or not they choose to get off that couch, or not, and actually start that work, well, good luck with that. That's what I'm about, is trying to encourage people to take personal responsibility for their own evolution. It's not going to be handed to you. You got to go out and earn it.
Absolutely. And also, Yeah, it seems like you would have to also move through all the taboos that people have created. I mean, just in in mysticism alone, you have to look through all these different books and use discernment, but not be skewed by someone's misperception of someone else's writing. What would you say about that?
Well, of course, that's one of the reasons saints say not to actually talk about your own personal interplane experiences for fear of contaminating another person's relationship to it. Everybody's different. Everybody's got a different tune.
Right.
And everybody has a job to do before, this is metaphor now, before any of us get out of here. That means I'm impatient and would like to have the rest of you get off the couch now, please.
Well, no one gets out of here alive, right?
Well, at one level, there is a, sorry about that. Okay. I'm knocked over this irritating microphone. Okay. I'm going to choke him. There is this place in the fourth level of relationship to self where, you have physical, emotional, intellectual, and archetypal. The archetypal plane is the numinous or collective unconscious. It's the length, girth, and width of man, and probably the place where you and I become one person. And that down on the physical plane, ego is what separates us and makes us so lonely. Mm-hmm. It's also what makes us unique and different from each other. Now, there's important things here in terms of when you have that as a worldview. It doesn't mean it's right. It's a way of looking at the world. By looking at the world in certain ways, you have access to that world that you would not have otherwise in an altered state. For example, the way I used to teach my SEALs, breathing techniques, where having controlled breathing would allow you to go into an altered state of consciousness where everything that you experienced was in slow motion. Mm-hmm. So you're almost passing out. However, it turns out that if you do it just right, you still remain functional and experience the martial fighting as Tai Chi, and then become paranormal in your abilities to box. And that's what I did, was add the physics aspects to altered states so that Navy SEALs could become supermen, so that they could do things you cannot do with current belief systems.
Mm-hmm. And how long did you teach the Navy SEALs?
11 years.
Wow.
I started in 68 and actually stepped away in 79. And now I'm back in it again because it's one of those clubs. Unfortunately, you never actually leave.
You don't resign, huh?
Hotel California, that's right. It's you step in, but you don't step out. It's a forever club. Navy intelligence is different than Navy. I was Navy intelligence. I worked out of anesthesiology. And so I had labs set up to train and individuals how to withstand interrogation, working with NLP and heart rate and eye fluctuations and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I would teach them how to interrogate by when they would ask something, the response, biological responses could often be measured with other kinds of equipment. We had, what is it called? Oh, yeah, a paranoia meter.
Sound like a lie detector or what?
I'm kidding. Yeah, that's an old hippie joke. Have a.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's an old hippie joke. But it was like that. And what I did was explored the length, girth, and width of the occult, the occluded, the hidden, and tried to find what gems were there that might be integrated into our sciences that were useful and would advance us as a human race. And unfortunately, one of the reasons I left and became a dirt farmer is that all my stuff was being used to make weapons.
Right.
I was one that invented synthetic telepathy and the tasers and masers. Did that in the labs. We did all the drug studies.
What year was that again, Richard?
What?
What year was that?
1967, 1968, 1969, University of Washington, School of Anesthesiology, 1970, 1971. I was in anesthesiology working out of labs, even though I was no longer in the department for another 4 years. So I went from SEAL Corporation, which was like a Blackwater ops that later was called Navy SEALs, but we were called SEAL Corp out of Amherst for, the 6 years I was there. And then the next 5 years, the next 6 years, I worked under Dr. Carl Schleicher, who was the smoking man in your classic X-Files. He was a bird colonel out of the Pentagon. And I, at some point, became lead physicist and, could at least make bridging and what was going on. And at the time, we knew about aliens, things like that, but really we were more worried about what the Russians were doing back then in the 70s. The Psychic Discoveries book, Ostrander and Schroeder and others that had come out at that time really had a lot of creepy stuff in it.
Right. Well, Russians were very much ahead, weren't they, on the psychic level, or no?
Not so much the Russians, like Kalugina and some of that. That was all a bunch of BS. But the Yugoslavians, yes. They had some sciences. Milan Riesel was the one doing the ESP with hypnosis. Janov was doing cosmobiology, where they were able to predict earthquakes with the planetary motions. This is even before we started understanding the nature of sunspots and how coronal mass ejections affect the Earth. So, I had a grant with Department of Interior I was working with MRU on earthquakes and looking for early warning. Bill Franklin, one of my counterparts at Kent State University, was doing, at that time, catfish had a galvanic skin response. Their skin response would change about 8 hours before an event. And so we had like a biosensor, kind of thing that we could predict when an earthquake would happen. You have to realize this is the old days when San Andreas Fault was like a serious thing, and Santa Cruz scared a lot of people.
Right. Well, that technology now, I'm sure, has been really upgraded, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Unfortunately, now they're tinkering with life support, and that's kind of, we're on a spaceship, and there's no owner's manual, and so we got some crew that's messing with the life support system.
Yes, a skeleton crew probably, but yeah, it seems that way, doesn't it?
A skeleton crew. Actually, there's 2 million people added to the crew every week.
Very interesting. And what crew are we talking about here?
Well, that's a NASA paper that came out on the new directions of warfare. I'll upload that. Ought to be creepy. It's 114-page slides of what happens next with nanobots, that kind of thing. Yeah. And the world that we're going toward has some very strange directions, including transhumanism and the relationships that way. I posted something from, what's his name? Stephen Hawking. And after he had seen the movie, what is it?
Transcendence?
I'm sorry, Transcendence, yes. And had a serious concern about artificial intelligence and the future of man with it.
Well, he's kind of plugged into artificial intelligence, isn't he?
Well, yeah.
I mean,
this NASA report runs it down chapter and verse, and it makes William Gibson look like silly. And so all of that's happening.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know it.
This bio API that has been alleged to be in some of the geoengineering things that causes snow to burn. It's a polymer with a bacteria in it, and this bacteria is nitrogen producing. It's or carbon dioxide producing. It's methane producing. Excuse me. Very creepy, and it's infected everybody on Earth. I just today posted where they're going to chemtrail today. We now have maps on where they're going to do it, and globally, it's creepy. And who's paying for it when you realize that an aircraft going across the sky like that is $250,000 an hour. And if you start counting them up and the crisscrossing that they're doing, who's paying for that?
Who is paying for that? Do you know? Can you say?
Well, my vectors, yeah, well, I don't know. I have this awful gut feeling that it's three different transnational corporations I've traced to the United Nations. It has nothing to do with global warming, which is a farce. Mike Mandeville who is doing the old Edgar Casey thing, just posted online. Mike Mandeville, he's out of Phoenix, also, by the way, and his take on the ice shelf of Antarctica that's melting and going to raise is a bunch of bullshit. They're just, again, trying to distract us. And really, is Fukushima going to kill us? Is geoengineering going to try to blackmail the air we breathe so that we have to pay a due for having clean air, whatever? There's all kinds of possibilities here. Mm-hmm. The geoengineering all started about 18 years ago, when all the different biochemists started disappearing or showing up suicidal, dead, or otherwise murdered. And here we are 18 years later, and look at what's going on. You got to, my military experience says that there are dots. And while some of it is military and the Star Wars, there's something else going on out there. And that part, I know I don't know. And that part's scary. I know what they're doing with HARP. I posted on that as well, and I can give you some information on that.
Actually, weren't they disabling HARP? I just saw an article on that about it being dismantled. Is that correct?
Well, that's because they've got other facilities.
Mm-hmm,
You're talking
right.
about one in Alaska.
Mm-hmm, yes.
Well, there's 12 different facilities now. So which one are we talking about?
Yeah, the one in Alaska is the one they were referring to, but yeah, I'm sure it's gone.
That's probably because the transmitters are old and they need to rebuild them or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like Area 51. They'll move it.
Very true. Have you been to Area 51?
Yes, I have.
You have. You can't talk about it, right?
Well, I can talk about some of it, but I have a memory block, and I have gone through debriefing with the military, and none of us, including hypnosis, can get through that memory block of what happened.
How did they create the memory block, Richard?
It was done by an entity. And wanted to talk to me, wanted to meet me. And I was not involved. I was in Seattle, so I was not involved, and I was invited to Area 51. Well, actually, I was more than invited. I was, not told, but
escorted.
Actually, well, it's interesting. It's a cooperative thing. My handler does not handle me. There are things he wants me to do, and I will debate it. And
right.
And they ultimately always have followed my lead and what I felt safe to do or I don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And so I've never been to mine. Of course, I'm manipulated, but in terms of they profiled me, and so they know what's going to ring my bell and why I want to look at something. Mm-hmm. But I got invited to Area 51 because this entity had made a call out, wanted to have an interview with me. What I remember is walking into this room where the entity was, and I don't remember anything else. And when I try to remember it, I start to stutter.
Really? What was you don't know the entity's name or a description or anything like that?
It was the documents that I remember reading had KRIL, Krill, and but I don't know what that all means. And it was at level 8. If anybody that is familiar with Broom Lake, then they know what I'm talking about. It was at level 8, and I went down to level 8, and what they did is they had a big table out with a bunch of top secret documents on it, way more than I could read, and I just started grabbing documents and slamming it, and 1 hour later the door opened, and they said that we were motionless for the brief time I was together. And I can't remember a thing about it. I remember it was all feminine. It wasn't masculine. I felt feminine, soft. I felt that's what led me to write my works in synthetic telepathy. I couldn't understand how it was communicating. I could hear the voice inside my head. Mm-hmm. It was feminine.
And did that continue on? Richard, after you left, did you still have the telepathy or the communication or no? Do you remember?
Well, I was in its presence.
Okay, just while you were in his presence or her presence. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then I wanted to figure out how that worked.
Right.
That's what led me to write my paper on synthetic telepathy and the work I did there. Yeah. It's actually, man has other sensory motor inputs. Alan Frey of Willow Grove discovered that one. It's in the temporal lobes. And you can heterodyne voices onto the 0.3 to 3 gigahertz. That's the bandwidth. And it's interesting because, the first application would have been hearing for the deaf, communicating in space, where you don't have...
absolutely. A perfect astronaut, yeah.
And it works. It works cleanly.
Tell me about it.
So yeah, that's right. You're a targeted individual.
Well, I'm not targeted. I'm a test pilot, but yeah, okay. Continue.
We'll leave it at that. Yeah. To be discussed at another time.
Yeah, you and I never really got into that. We'll talk about it another time.
But I went through a bunch of debriefing and some fairly sophisticated hypnotic therapy to try to extract whatever memories I can. And I can't, it's like...
You're not the first person who said that, Richard, though, but other people have said that they go in and they've been there and they it's like they have an erasure of some kind. They don't remember anything. It's amazing.
Well, I remember before and after. And then, of course, there's all the people talking about the fact that it happened, and I pick up little mnemonics or clues of what must have happened, but I don't remember.
What's interesting,
I remember before, though, going in and all the documents I read.
Right. Can you imagine something like that, an array system being deployed where it's actually doing that to people on a daily basis, globally, each individual person wandering the planet?
What do you think the TV does?
Well, yeah, but not to that extent. You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, can you imagine? A mind wipe?
I can. That's
mind
the
wipe?
deal.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I went into agriculture and became a dirt farmer.
I mean, to me, it seems like it's unlimited insofar as the technology and what it really can do and what they're really using it for.
Well, and nanotechnology and all the rest of it. There's a whole bunch of things out there. How about nanomite blood that re-engineers you if you get into crash mode?
That's wild. Can you elaborate on that?
At least you're reincarnated on the physical plane. Reconstructed.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, there is a artifact that I've seen, which is a type of blood that had nanites. And that's where we first got the concept of what a nanite is. Actually, the geoengineering is now using a bacteria that is so small, it looks like a large virus in the nanometer region. It's like nanobot. And what that bacteria does is it manufactures a polymer that, when injected with barium oxide, will trap and hold water moisture. Just pulls it right out of the air, traps it, creates these clouds. And then, of course, the rain will wash it down and out of the atmosphere and into the soil, and then they relay it again. And what they have, essentially, is a conduit, or what we call a waveguide in the ionosphere, that they can do communications even around ELM pulses and things like that.
Fascinating.
So it's just it's a Star Wars thing where they can direct particle beam weapons. There's some woman, Wood, her name's Wood, talks about 9/11.
Judy Wood?
I'm sorry?
Was it Judy Wood or no?
Yes, it was Judy Wood, yes. And she talks about the new kinds of particle beam weapons that we're starting to evolve to. John Hutchinson lives over here in Gold Beach. I have met John and like him.
Oh, yeah.
I have no clue about the Hutchinson effect. Basically, what he's doing is taking old microwave, they're actually radar guides, and he's working harmonics that supposedly work a scalar wave that will destabilize radioactive waste. And, but that has not been confirmed. And his wife, Lazar, I forget her name.
I think it's Nancy, isn't it?
Nancy, yeah, Lazar.
I'm trying to get him on my show. Yeah.
I can get him on your show for you. I know him.
He keeps, I get in touch with him and then he drops the ball. But you want to put a fire under him.
Yeah. John is an idiot savant. He is not very articulate and cannot truthfully speak like me as a scientist. However, he is onto something. What?
Yeah.
And exactly, that part of it, I don't have a clue. I know that there are inferences of interest in his work, but he would be the kind of thing the military would bring me in to do a make or break experiment. And then we'd either pursue it or drop it and move on to something else.
That's interesting. So are you still working with the military?
Yeah, I do minor things with them. Like right now, I'm trying to educate. There's my group of SEALs have a mandate for educational reform with the paradigm shift in agriculture. We would like to see food taken off the monetary exchange and become a divine right. We'd like to see everybody doing gardening as a recreational sport. And so that's one of my mission statements right now. And so while that's a nice, warm, fuzzy the bear, Smokey the Bear, warm and fuzzy thing, truthfully, it is our education that is sadly in trouble right now. Is one of the main things in America. When I was in Mexico, the three key words used to describe an American, you or me, was ill-informed, ignorant, and complacent.
Wow.
Those are the words that Europeans refer to Americans as now. How's that feel?
That's terrible. That's too bad. But, I do see a dumbing down.
But it's true. With Common Core, look, I have worked with dyslexic children, autistic. And when an autistic child can grow a plant better than a master gardener, how is that child limited? And to treat it as such in an educational system, well, it doesn't do math and it doesn't do this or that. Our wealth and treasure lies in the diversity of our children. And that is the truth of it. And to stamp that part out where everybody's got to be the same and at the same level at this place or that is to turn your back on our most prized resource. And truthfully, in Mexico, even with the poverty that I saw, I could not believe it. The family was still intact. And while crime was rampant with slavery and drugs, spousal abuse, whatever, the children were still happy. The family and the mother was still running the roost. And I saw that, and that is the very thing that we do not have in this country. And what we're doing is going toward Mexico, but without that family bonding that teaches the children. That's the way I like to do it. That Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song. Treat your children well.
Right. Well, I see that too. It seems to me like technology has taken the place of a parent or parenting in general.
Well, certainly texting has turned them into staring down into a void.
Right.
Rather than having any true communication.
Right. Well, don't you think that's just preparing them for the transhumanism event or transhumanism in general?
Stay tuned on all of that.
Right. And so what do you think the purpose of transhumanism is?
Well, transhumanism, as Kurzweil would resolve it, is the marriage of machine, computer, with the mind
right.
to enhance it. And the thing is, I have recently posted scientific articles, now discussing the construct of consciousness not being able to be duplicated by a machine.
I agree with that.
Well, yeah, but that's a gut thing. I'm talking about mathematical proofs on what consciousness is and what it is not.
Well, how do you prove it through mathematics?
Well, okay, you can start with the nature of what information is and what information is not. One of the primary theorems in information theory would say that if you have enough information to ask a coherent question, you have enough information to answer it. That the answer lies in the structure of your question. And language as a aesthetic perception and its forms of information theory and the way you group conceptual thoughts and metaphor for, imaging, it all comes back to your mind's eye.
That makes sense. And also, where do you think the soul would dwell between the spaces of man and machine merged together?
Jesus, you're really going down into it, aren't you?
Well, hey, that's what I'm here for.
In the forest go, soul and spirit within matter. Well, the soul is the immortal part of man that seemingly works through the lower brain or gut, because the gut or intuitions is beyond space-time. It is about past, present, and future lives. And if you learn how to touch into or tap into the gut for intuitions, that makes you a super soldier. The intuitions, not thinking. Thinking will get you killed. To be able to work with the enteric nervous system will save your life, because that is, and here's the metaphor again, that is what you're supposed to be doing. What happens is when you think, you actually create scenarios of what could happen. And if it's possible, you can count on it. That means if it's possible that you can get shot, you will get shot.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. We manifest. Sure.
That's how I trained them.
Well, and you said you're still training the Navy SEALs? You're still...
No, I don't train SEALs anymore.
Oh, okay.
I have my laboratory, no, but I do other things. What I'm doing now is I'm old and grumpy, so I will go to certain bunkers and fine-tune them and interface them, network them with others. Nice. I do that for people like Kucinich and some others out of the Midwest.
Well, I suppose you can't elaborate on fine-tune, huh?
Well, barter, setting up a food infrastructure, for example, so that if California food doesn't happen this year, and it won't, what's going to happen is the drought is going to so devastate California agriculture that all your produce is going to go up, and the only things you can get are from Guatemala or Mexico or wherever. And when that happens, you're going to really appreciate the importance of having a garden, and it has nothing to do with food.
I agree.
Well, it is a relationship you have with yourself.
Is it not illegal to have or store rainwater over there in Oregon?
You mean that guy that got stuck in there? Yeah. Well, the way the state of Oregon puts that one is, what falls on the state of Oregon belongs to the state of Oregon. And so to collect it for personal use is against the law. Isn't that amazing? Wow. You know, like the Bundy Ranch, basically, it was a bunch of good old boys that tried to play a game and getting out of a bill, but truthfully, it was about China trying to make a land grab using a couple of corrupt senators, a father and son. And that almost went out of control. And if you don't think China and the U.S. government were watching, see how this all plays, so they had a better case book on how it'll go down. You know, I'm not advocating anything that Mahatma Gandhi, I think that is, you know, what we call not armed resistance as much as civil disobedience. Like, I will just say no. Now, guess what? That idea is working because Walmart is failing right now and probably will not exist by next year. Walmart. And that's because it takes less than 5% now of people shopping at Walmart saying, I'm no longer going to shop at Walmart. Just say no. And so that's how you get off the couch. You start one step at a time. In gardening, for example, the first year you might just clear some earth and look at the weeds that grow. The second year, you learn how to grow a few crops and take them out of the garden. The third year, you might learn how to can those crops. And the fourth year, you might learn how to eat out of the cupboards. In other words, it's a slow process of moving towards something. Simon says you can go halfway to the door. The goal is not to go to the door. It is the journey.
Making the move. You know, it's interesting because we have the chemtrails that supposedly control or manipulate the weather patterns, but at the same time, if that's the case, then why can't we have more water and no drought?
Well, they're using it for military application, not for medicine.
For bouncing radar signals, or?
Yeah, not radar, but yes. Signals, yeah. Electromagnetic band, yeah. Okay. Yeah, they're different frequency bands that they're using.
Makes sense.
HARP is... they tried mind control with HARP. It didn't work. They had, you know, the array up in Alaska, and then they opened a second array at its polar opposite down in Adelaide, Australia. And sure enough, they're using the frequency band that I write about, 0.3 to 3 gigahertz.
Oh, thanks. Thanks a lot, Richard.
Yeah, but, yeah, I know. But it didn't work, so everything's cool in that sense of it. However, it is a weapon for controlling weather.
Right.
And that's what they're using it for.
Well, let me ask you something. Can you scramble that signal?
What do you mean scramble it?
Can you scramble? Well, I'm sure there is a technology that can scramble the signal that they're using to cause the disruption.
Oh, you mean can you set up an interference pattern?
Correct.
Yeah. No, it's pretty tough.
Really?
Not microwave is quantum mechanical. It's on the size of an atom. Mm-hmm. And so, Faraday cage would have been the normal way to go, except microwave band just walks right through that. And so with that said, I had movies like Signs where they wrap their head in aluminum foil and trying to go across the Van Allen belt. That's another part of the problem, because of the radiation fields there. It's pretty bad. Most astronauts are pretty well nuked going into space. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like, there it is. And now they have aircraft, unmanned, that fly at 120,000 feet. Mm-hmm. That's space.
Well, plus the black space program. I mean, you have to incorporate all that.
Well, there it is. Mm-hmm. And so there's where some of the money went.
Absolutely. They have infinite amounts of money, I'm sure.
But,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm just going to say Gore was the one that started the emphasis of doing that for global warming. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about global warming. It was about Star Wars.
Right, and SDI.
It wasn't about Star Wars. It's probably about controlling the air you breathe so they can market air just like they're going to market water in the food you eat.
Right. Now, you're talking SDI, a Strategic Defense Initiative, which was started up in the 80s?
That's right. Okay. Early 80s, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a while ago.
Yes, and it's they were trying in the 50s, doing the same thing with cloud seeding, using silver oxide, for opening up airports like San Francisco in the fog. Mm-hmm. And once they started to get that level of it, it went gear number 2. And they're just ramped it up. And right now, they're messing with our life support, and they don't have an owner's manual. And with that, it's kind of creepy to realize that the people that are doing these things are doing it for what I would normally think of as a distraction about mm-hmm. money. Money isn't real. It's like a theatrical prop.
Right. It's a form of energy. And also, do you think these guys are under some form of mind control that are in charge?
Well, there could be all kinds of, I don't know.
Well, I'm just wondering if they're compromised to some degree. It sounds like they would be. Maybe they don't have all the parts.
They've got a pod person that has reproduced them, mm-hmm. or they've got a little parasite inside on their all of these make good science fiction. I think
sounds like X-Files.
Occam's razor is the most logical and simplest, is most likely what it is about. Mm-hmm. And this is a communications and controlling the weather. Now, whether or not 9/11 was a demonstration of a new energy beam weapon, I don't know about that part. I do find Judy Wood's videos and conclusions interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so here I am. I don't know.
Okay. Well, we're going to head for a break real quick. We'll be right back, everybody. Stay tuned to Dark Matter Radio. Welcome back, everybody, to Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my very special guest, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. And Richard.
Yes.
Hi. So I was going to inquire a little bit more about 9/11. What does your gut tell you about that, insofar as how the buildings fell?
I absolutely know that I don't know where the building went. That Judy Wood's argument, is very compelling. Mm-hmm. I went to see 9/11, and it was already cleaned out, and the less buildings being destroyed from that kind of biomass falling was unbelievable. Now, one thing I did do is that building could not fall as quickly as it did in terms of it was within the one building. I did a mathematical calculation because I had a nice video of it and could actually do a rate of fall, and it was within 3% of gravity. That means there was nothing under it if that building was coming down. How does that work? Well, the only way I know how to do that is demolition. And to set up demolition. And at the time, even using thermite would not have taken those buildings down the way they came down. So it was quite obvious, a new technology. That's what she points out. What it is, who knows? And there were anomalies with the way the aircraft hit the building, and there was no aircraft. They never found any of the wings or anything like that at the Pentagon. It was quite obviously hit with a missile. Why would they tell everybody it was an aircraft? What happened to the passengers that were on that aircraft? Like Flight 370. What's going on?
Right.
We will probably never know.
What's your take on Flight 370? Not to change the subject.
Okay. That's a little more straightforward. There's obviously there was a collusion with the pilot and those 20 individuals connected to Rothschild. Now, beyond that, the collateral damage of witness protection program or whatever they possibly do, there is no way you lose a jet like that unless there's another new technology involved. And Boeing had already acknowledged they had flight recorder boxes that can be controlled from satellites, that can overtake a pilot's control. And that is in all aircraft now, and it was developed by the Boeing company. So in terms of an aircraft hitting the 9/11 building, or it was an energy weapon, there's just so many questions like the Kennedy's assassination. I don't know that we'll ever know or have the real story. I know that I've seen history not be right. For example, I have been to an Antarctica. I have seen the Nazi base. I have been there. I've seen it. So where's that in recorded history?
Well, can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah. Okay. I was taken there in the early 70s. My job, I wasn't lead on that. It was a woman, just like in the movies, the Alien versus Predator. She was in charge. And I was the physicist in charge of the light. Okay. We were down in deep Earth. I have no idea how down deep we are. Maybe 30 miles into the mantle. And there was a cavern down there that was over a mile high that was a perfect bunker. I mean, we're talking about, and it had a bacterial growth that was bioluminescing. So it was daylight. It was so high. There was weather and clouds and precipitation. There were thermal hot springs, and there was a Viking base there from the 14th century, and the Nazi base, the one I saw, could slip 19 subs. I saw it. And that was in the 70s. And I understand that the Nazis were there as of up through the 60s when they did an event on the South Pole, dropping nuclear weapon, trying to take the Nazis out. I talked with a Royal Air Force guy that was older than me. He's about maybe 10 years older than me, that told me he was in the mop-up when the RAF and the Americans and the Russians went in to mop up what was left of the Nazis. And he told me that some of the Nazis actually escaped into lower caverns, which is below the mantle. Now that would be consistent with Sitchin and the hollow earth theory stuff, because I do know from what I do with bunkers that there is everything's got tunnels under it in the mantle. Below the mantle, I don't know anything about that. But what I can, the mantle is about 120 miles or something like that. So, and it's here in Oregon. I mean, it starts in Brookings and goes all the way down into Northern California. And now there's artificial tunnels that I can take a motorcycle going from Evans Creek up behind Rogue River all the way down to Hyampan in the Trinity Alps. It's a 4.5 hour by motorcycle underground. And I understand, I haven't seen it, but I understand the East Coast has it all the way from Maine all the way down into Florida.
And these are not accessible to regular civilians, correct?
No, this is, military mostly. Okay. There is, now in Grants Pass, we have everything here. We have the Ku Klux Klan and the Posse Comitatus and the Mormons, the Seventh-day Adventists, and there's even pedophile groups off of Jump Off Joe. But you got to love the survival center part of it. It's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. And so far as the Nazi base goes now, there was, I guess people were rumoring that Hitler actually survived and was at the Nazi base.
I don't know about that part. Yeah, okay. I don't know anything about that part. What I did was a physicist in charge of the light and how that works.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's the part I did. And I was able to figure it out. It's a special bioluminescing bacteria. It's a little kind of it's kind of cool.
Oh, it sounds really interesting. I mean, it sounds like you've had a very, very fascinating journey on this world. I mean, the stuff you've done.
I can tell you what a bullet sounds like when it goes by.
Well, that's not too fun. But you know what I mean? You've been around the cool toys, and it seems to me like there must be some decent people working in these divisions. I mean, they can't all be
like me. Now, in the 70s, and this is an important point. In the 70s, everybody that was in the paranormal were like me, open. There were watchers, of course, observers, or they call them watchers, and they would keep an eye on what Dr. Carl Schleicher was doing or something like that. I have names, but it was blue sky. We had no idea where we were going to go, and that was okay. That was good. The whole thing was about the journey and what we might discover as true or BS. And in the 80s, it all changed. It was no longer about advancement of man and knowledge base. It was about application and money. Mm-hmm. And if it didn't have an application, there was no interest in studying it. And that includes medicine. And so that was one of the reasons I got into alternative medicine, because it was an alternative. And but now, today, of course, it's business as usual. And I have come to live to see the day when alternative medicine has gone the way of big pharma. It's all, none of it's real out there anymore. It's different. Yeah. But I was part of the original one, where there was an intent to try to do the right thing. And that's the difference between the 70s and the 80s. It went from astral projection to remote viewing. Remote viewing means you were spying on someone rather than astral projection, letting an alien run your car down the street like Shirley MacLaine and Out on a Limb. It's different.
Right. And then, of course, then from the 80s to the 90s, I mean, all these decades go by, and it seems to me like there's some new technology that surfaces or some new weapon.
That's right. Actually, we were always interested in old technologies, including the Nazis. There were other civilizations that were able to do things we can't. And so we were always interested in how did that work? How do you build those pyramids? What do they mean? Et cetera. There's a goal in all of that in terms of trying to evolve and become something more. It's like Castaneda and his four enemies of man. The first was fear. That was the first enemy. And that if you overcame fear, then you had power, personal power. And that in itself became an enemy, because it corrupted power, ultimate power corrupted ultimately. And then, of course, as you got wiser, you started to see things more clearly, and clarity became an enemy or a distraction. And then, of course, the fourth enemy is what I currently enjoy, old age. Too old to do anything about it now.
Well, your mind is working just fine. And that's another thing. What is your take on when you leave this world? Now, this is just theoretical, obviously, but would you take your form or your mind and merge it into a machine and another cloned type embodiment?
Well, the way I figure it, my goal now is to incarnate and get off this wheel this is my last incarnation because if I come back to this world, I'm going to need a gas mask. Well, that's right. As good a reason as any to want to get out of here.
I think everybody's on the last ride here.
Well, that's an accurate metaphor because, of course, Joseph Campbell does talk about apocalypse as perpetual in its potential. It is part of the length, girth, and width of man. It just does not need to necessarily dominate. Is the world going to end by 2050? Well, maybe man will evolve to a place where time isn't real anymore, and that becomes a meaningless statement. If that's true, then what does radioactivity mean? So it's more about a relationship to yourself and the war that you're currently fighting with yourself.
And everything else is just navigating those waves of evolution, I suppose.
That's correct. They're distractions to keep your eye off the ball.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I know we talked a little bit about Star Wars, but we didn't touch base on mind control with the cults. And I'm curious insofar as what was your impression of all? I know occultism tends to merge with mind control.
Dietrich and Simon LeBeau and Temple of Set and what is that?
So is there an affiliation between mind control and occultism?
There have always been vectors like that with some power groups out of Texas to be distinguished differently than the Bohemian Club. I was invited into the Bohemian Club because of my divine right. And I turned it down because I'm a nerd and know my limitations. So I don't do that, but I don't think that they're necessarily bad. What I'm concerned about are the 9 individuals that seemingly own everything in the world, and then the rest of us get to divvy up what's left over. And while the wealthy think they are wealthy, they're no different than the poor, and there are 9 families that don't even work in that thing, and 4 of them are Rothschilds.
That's really amazing to me when I think about all that.
Well, you mean king of the world?
Well, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, how did that get out of control? At what point in the continuum did this happen?
Well, the first thing, you start with a monetary system with Rothschild signing on a piece of paper and calling it good. That was a check. That was in the 17th century. And today, the big war that's actually going on between the, quote, Illuminati or New World Order is really a bunch of Jesuits out of Rome battling China and the petrodollar for minimum wage. That's what it all comes down to. It's as simple as that. At $2 an hour or $12 an hour. And that's why more than 70% of what you own right now came from China, because there is no gross national product anymore.
That's very true. It doesn't seem like we really have anything here in the United States.
Well, it's about time to decentralize and build a little more sovereignty in your relationship to yourself and your needs.
And that too. And then
it's a new car. That's crazy. Who cares?
Right. Yeah. Actually, it's your own embodiment that really is important. I think that's what you're saying.
Well, the only thing, like I said, that you actually, the physical world, physical plane, is probably where we all go to be sick spiritually, and that once you wake up, that's what death probably is waking up from this dream.
I guess you can die while you're alive as well, because there seems to me like a lot of people are awakening from this, what I would call a false reality to some extent.
Now, what do you do? I've even got a paper for that. It's Zen Garden.
Yeah, what do you do once you're awakened to that level?
Awake, what do I do now?
Give me a spaceship.
I'll send you that paper. That's a lovely paper. It's you can start by training your mind.
Right.
Meditation. That's a good place to start. That's why all the saints in history have said so. And so there it is. Well, I'll do that someday. Well, okay, now you're 60 years old and you want the mind or brain of a meditator of 30 years. How are you going to do that when you're already 60? Well, that's where I came in with power tools and the idea of using enhancements. You don't do it quite as well, but I've been using biofeedback now for 40 years. So now I can control heart rate, pulse, respiration, things like that, pass a polygraph just by controlling my mind.
Right, and you're breathing. And in the biofeedback machine, you're actually hooking yourself up. How often do you do that?
Well, there's different forms of it. There's
Okay.
electromyograph, which does muscle groups. Galvanic skin would be skin current, having to do with electrolytes that are released when you lie, that kind of thing. Oh, your eye, pupil eyes. You can pneumograph that measures your breath. There's a voice stress analyzer that can measure the stress in your voice to determine whether or not you're lying. Of course, I can look at somebody and the way their eyes move, I can tell if they're lying or not, making it up.
Well, can you tell if people are programmed as well? Because I've had people come to me in the past that have been programmed, and their eyes almost work like typewriters.
Well, maybe they had tattoos like we were talking about earlier. That's so cool.
I'm telling you, I'm telling you the truth.
What is that called? Yeah. Some of that's all mythology, and makes a good yarn, and feels right to me, kind of thing. But again, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. And the more you think about these things, the more they become real, because it is your imagination.
Yeah, we've had this discussion before, but I do know there is technology out there that has been stalking people, whether it's a local gang stalking or a covert intelligence program. I am very familiar with that technology as well, and people have suffered. And that's why my next question is why the suffering? Why can't they just stop doing what they're doing to these targeted people? Do you have any solution to that?
Yeah, I don't. That would be what I would call non-human.
I agree.
And so, well, I mean, we have in our vocabulary, we have metaphors of what we would classify as being human. Like compassion, love, charity, and empathy. Those kinds of things. Now, somebody that could literally rape the earth, the mother, has got to be non-human.
Or that's their programming, basically.
Well, that programming could go back to that fourth gene in the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if you know anything about O negative and the negative concepts of type O and type negative bloods as the alien gene, but that is an interesting subject.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a lot about that. I haven't studied the bloodlines like my ex-wife has. Iona has written papers for Paranoia magazine on that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And but I don't have the depth of her understanding, because I haven't hung out with a Comte de Saint Germain or anything like that. What I do have, though, is a TARDIS, and so I got a get out of jail card. I haven't even been born yet.
You have a get out of jail card?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Lucky you.
I have a time machine. A time machine.
I think we had this discussion before.
Yes,
Can I have that machine? Can I borrow that?
Want to go for a little ride?
Don't worry, I'll bring it back. Really.
Want to go for a little ride? I love that when he said that to Allie in the movie Contact.
Yeah, it was great.
Calling her from space. There's a second.
That was a great movie, actually.
Well, what he was using, Carl Sagan used, was the diamond body, the face center cubic hexagonal close pack structure. That geometric imaging is what we now believe to be a time machine. It's something you envision in your mind's eye. And that sacred geometry, when it's envisioned in a certain manner, form, releases neurotransmitters that enhance and create other kind of resonant things in systems. And time, there is a new movie coming out that's going to be very cool called Lucy. And let me tell you, she gets hit with some nanites, and it gives her 100% use of her brain. And at the end of the movie, in the preview they're showing, she's flipping back, forward and backward in time like you would on a computer screen as she changes things.
Very interesting. Is that out right now?
No, Lucy comes out this summer.
I was thinking of Lucy. Wasn't there a chimpanzee named Lucy?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't there a little chimpanzee they did experimentation
on? Yeah, but this Lucy's a whole lot different. Check it out. If you just do the movie Lucy and you get a trailer, that ought to drop your jaw big downtimes.
Well, it seems like they are paralleling a lot of technology,
Well, that's the way you introduce constructs to the public.
Mm-hmm, right.
Which is usually, just for the record, about 40 years behind.
I would say it's longer than that, but what's interesting? Now, the body obviously is composed of sacred geometry in general. So you're saying is that the time machine, or theory of possibly, is basically inside the body.
It's the glial cells in your brain and the way they're structured.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are born and you come out of the womb, the first neurologic circuit that burned in is that noradrenaline serotonin, that fight-flight thing happening. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it burns in an engram in your brain. And because your brain is convoluted, it's not a straight line. It's a bunch of geometric lines going here, there, around. And when you step back and look at it, it uses the vector equilibrium matrix, which forms the diamond body. It's talked about in Merkaba mysticism. Mm-hmm. It is probably the throne chariot of God, and that is a spaceship, time machine. Space and time are actually not real. They're subsets of a lesser dimensions.
Right. I agree. That's yeah. I really resonate with that information. Have you written a book on all of this? Covering? I mean, which book?
I'm writing those kinds of books now. Yes, I have some books out that talk about some of this, but not. I'm more in the physics end, and I have books that are unpublished. Mm-hmm. Like that AA exam. If you do that AA exam, you will be an expert in Aleister Crowley.
Oh my goodness! Well.
Who cares? Well, Crowley, really. Crowley's magic systems, until my own, his systems were very useful, and of course, OTO is very, very big time.
Well, did the rituals work, Richard? When you were working with Aleister Crowley's rituals, did they work for you?
Yeah.
They did. Okay.
Yeah, I did. I'll send you one for contacting your holy guardian angel. I did a ritual out of the sacred magic of Bremelin the Mage, which is a retirement issue where you do a vow of silence and you do the things for like a 6-month period. And I actually taught that and had a bunch of students go through it, and it works. Yes. Well, I mean, am I enlightened? Yes, I have access to parts of myself most people don't.
Right. Well, you know what? Oh, go ahead.
No. What
I was going to ask you. I know that a lot of people who are also magical practitioners that I've spoken with, we've talked a lot about ritual and the craft, and a lot of them are under the impression that there are many books out there in magic and mysticism that are actually set up as traps for the person.
Well, it's like siddhas. You get romantic about being able to win the lottery using your intuitions, and it is a distraction.
Right.
Okay. So from a metaphorically point of view, there were in the early years, Case, Paul Foster Case and others would purposefully leave out critical pieces of information that put the puzzle together, and it would only be the adept that, had enough knowledge to make the bridge or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's all in the Crowley studies there that I gave one. Okay. So that is part of the thing. Magic is a shortcut, and as all shortcuts has danger and big bad wolves in the forest. And so you have to be very careful. Like with using drugs as a system of magic, you could become an addict or you get distracted. Leary wrote a book called The Varieties of Psychedelic Experience, which was based on the Bordeaux Thadal. And that was where he made his famous statements about set and setting. The idea of being able, if you're going to do a ritual, which is basically the celebration of a myth, now you've got a tool that can align sound and color and to the planets and their relationships to health and wisdom and love and those kinds of things. It's all in metaphor, and originally was talismanic magic. Crowley moved it to drugs and using drugs, and then of course now that would be to intensify the intent. That's called the Budwill, and the idea of creating a thought form that you now can project into the physical world. A thought form could be called, let me think of a real famous thought form, World War II, where it's a magical child that is constructed for business. That's what war is all about, by the way. It's all about money. And money is a theatrical prop, and what's real is the labor that was put in to making that thing happen. Money itself is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
And once we realize that, well, maybe that's what that movie Zeitgeist moving forward was all about. The idea that we've had, 400 years of currency, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to move forward. I have a group, cool, they're in 4 states over in North Carolina area, doing permacredits.com. And it's permaculture and community supported agriculture that's based on barter rather than on money.
Mm-hmm.
And Oregon, where I live here, has the Oregon Barter Fair, or the Oregon Country Fair, that was originally started by the Rainbow family. And the whole idea was barter. And so basically, a couple of years back, it was called, it's in Veneta, and so they would call it Veneta Freaky, with a bunch of old ladies making fashion statements, walking around naked with paint and makeup, things like that. It's kind of a cool event.
Well, I think that in something like that, you'd obviously have to learn a craft or a trade.
Well, that's right.
Right?
Yeah, you find that's what Aborigines do. They find their natural velocity, their position in the scheme of it all. That is what, by definition, is what is meant by indigenous. That's why children under 4 are considered more indigenous even than Aborigines. They are at perfect sense and balance with their environment. Mm-hmm. And that you put them down in a sand pile and watch how they go into the dirt.
Mm-hmm. Right. And how many of those children do you think are really being manipulated genetically, though, that are born in this timeline?
That's called elementary education in Common Core. It's got many faces to it. And that's the problem, is that it's across the board, and they're attacking us at every orifice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly seems that way, and it almost seems to me like this planet is fated into becoming part of this transhumanism program.
Well, as much as you have that, you also have people like myself that are trying to show you where the light is.
Right, actually, but even if we know what's going on, we're not changing the circumstances on the world, are we? What do you think?
You won't, but your granddaughter will, and your granddaughter is watching you, which means that you walk your talk and you do your part, which might seem useless and insignificant, but it is enough to make the changes. And that's how it works.
Very interesting. Well, that sounds like a good thing. I hope that does pan out that way. I get the impression...
it's not about hope.
Mm-hmm.
It's about active participation.
Right. Well, the thing that concerns me the most is that the children, we talked about this, they're not being taught or educated correctly, which means that the generations coming up are going to be even probably more dumbed down than the ones that are already here.
Well, that's why I was talking about the lost generation. But I'm going to say that those kids that are 4 years old right now, there's your Cloud Atlas opportunity with mentorship and facilitators. I mean, there it is. That's how you can do that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense right there. And so far as your herbalist now, you are an herbalist now. Do you make tinctures? What you up to?
Elixirs and Elixir Vita. Yes, I use alcohol. Actually, tinctures, essences, and elixirs in all these different forms is the percent of alcohol in it. That's a simple thing. That's in my book, The Potential of Herbs as a Cash Crop. I have a whole chapter in there on how to make cottage industries with essential oils and things like that. Am I an herbalist? No. Well, yes. Basically, I have written a 5-volume book, where only volume 1's out right now, called The Encyclopedia of Alternative Agriculture. And it is probably the most definitive work ever written in herbs and spices. I have all kinds of books on herbs and spices. There's stuff that comes out of Switzerland, called in the market. So how much France uses and how much the United States uses and things like that. But I write on how to grow individual crops, how to harvest them. And now, in my first books that I wrote, the potential of, the magical and ritual use of herbs, I have subsequent magical and ritual use of aphrodisiacs and magical and ritual use of perfumes. Those are inner traditions, Thorson, Bear, Sphinx, Verlagen. Now, with that, those books were written on magic, and the magic book on herbs, what that book was about originally was to keep those 28 herbs that were psychedelics and or depressants, sedatives, stimulants out of the Uniform Controlled Substance Act. And I did that by adding rituals to them to make them sacraments. And that's why, psilocybin mushroom is not illegal to have it in your possession or to grow it, even though they'll say it is. It isn't. What is illegal is to extract the chemistry and or sell the plant for profit. And otherwise, psilocybin has a ritual. That's where I talk about sex magic ritual and the Crowley's Mass of the Holy Ghost. And from that's how you structure sex to create thought forms rather than just for enjoyment and recreation. I was going to say something about Leary and the Bordeaux, and I didn't finish it. Leary's book said that Buddhists had 4 reasons for getting high, and only one of them was for recreation and escape. The other 3 reasons are for evolvement. And so, if you're not doing it for escape or recreation, but for expansion, they use LSD therapy now for the terminally ill. And there are uses for things like ketamine in terms of having close encounters. That's the original studies that we were doing.
Isn't ketamine used on horses?
Yes, it is one of the primary anesthesias now used for children.
My goodness, you're kidding. Isn't that pretty strong for a kid, though?
That's not intravenous. Intravenous is where you get the phenomena.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's the fabulous Furry Creek brothers.
My goodness.
Yeah, really going way back.
Well, I was under the impression that LSD opens the DNA, but it doesn't activate the DNA. In other words, it will.
Okay. You need to understand how LSD works. LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, is a toxin. And when you ingest that, within your body freaks out. Your body goes into overdrive and creates its own brain chemistry called lysergic acid amide. And the LSD part is broken down into salts and in the urine within 20 minutes. And the next resulting 20 hours of hallucinations are actually from your own body chemistry. And really what that does is basically jumpstart that specific neurotransmitter in your brain. We all have it. That is the experience when you go and you get something. You see how something connects with something else. That is lysergic acid amide as a specific neurotransmitter. There are others. You got dimethyltryptamine and others in there in the neurologic circuits. There's actually basically 8 primary ways that we now believe information unfolds down into or out of itself. And that's what makes the emotional plane more detailed of the physical plane. That's why EQ is considered in our universe models as superior, as having more information about something in the physical plane. Mm-hmm. And that's why your higher self and or dream states, that's how you talk to yourself, is in symbols and colors and things like that, not in the emotional content of how you felt about it, not what the effect is an elephant is flying across the room or something. Mm-hmm. In other words, dream analysis is not about things. It's about feelings.
That's interesting. So basically push aside the images.
Yeah, the images are there for you to metaphor it in a relationship to something else you already have a relationship to. But it is the emotional content of, that is where the richness lies. Mm-hmm.
Very well said. That's very interesting. Did you ever create a book on dream analysis? You probably did.
Yeah. Okay, my mentor, Dr. Stanley Krippner, has done a bunch. He worked with Montague Ullman out of Maimonides and did dream telepathy and some of the other studies in that regard. I do ESP studies for the military. That's what I did for the Navy SEALs. But the dream states, what we're trying to do, a lot of the Aborigines will say that dream time, lucid dreaming, that place, is closer to reality than consciousness. And so what we're trying to do, and I do this now with using biofeedback, I use what's called a neurologic shunt where I can bring dreamtime parts of the brain closer to consciousness. And when you are in that mode state, you actually can physically change reality with your thoughts. Mm-hmm. That's why a lot of Aborigines would suggest that the idea of working with dreamtime is more real, has more relationship to reality than consciousness does.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And of course, if you're changing reality, I'm sure that doesn't please a lot of people who want to be in control here on this planet.
Well, here's the deal on that. That's Aleister Crowley and what's called Liber Oz. Mm-hmm. You know, do without, you know, if someone is to thwart your will, that means take you away from your path. In Liber Oz, from natural law, you have a right to kill that person. You don't necessarily, but you have, if you try to change someone else's path, that is considered the worst sin there is.
Well, it seems like that's going on, though, Richard.
Well, yeah, and unless, of course, you don't know your will and are being distracted by wanting a pair of Nike tennis shoes.
Right.
Well, I mean, you know, that's
that makes sense.
Right. It's like distraction. Watch my hand while I pick your pockets with my other hand.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's you have to take responsibility for that. It is someone else. You allowed it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I always say the universe.
Or you're aware and waking up. Now you become more responsible for having to take ownership.
Right. Well, I always say there are no free shots in the universe. That's my motto anyway.
That's not a free ride.
So have you ever encountered any type of voodoo hitmen with your path of the magic and sorcery?
Hitmen?
Yeah, anybody who's tried to make maybe attack.
Oh, you mean assassins?
Yeah, that sort of
thing. I have met some assassins, but not through the military. Mm-hmm. And they working for local crime clubs like the Iron Lords out of Tacoma. Yeah, but you know, a club I belong to is a motorcycle club. But really, no, I'm a nerd. I don't hang out in covert David Bowie, I'll bet you think this song is about you kind of thing. You know, it was not Mick Jagger. It was about David Bowie, just for the record. Let everybody know. That part is very interesting. You know, David Bowie came all the way over from London every year to slum through the bookstore in Seattle that we had called Beltane. It was very cool. Well, I had titles in there. You couldn't get anywhere. Level Press. We had things from, what is that called? That was, oh, shoot. I can't even remember. DeVore's and out of Mokluma Press. They had everything. You could get anything from William Butler Yeats and Wilhelm Reich. Everything that Wilhelm Reich wrote. That was, yeah. And I don't know if those is still, but I had all of that stuff in my bookstore. That's the reason I had that bookstore that was my library, because the Seattle Public Library didn't have those books. Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. That's why I had the big bookstore back then, was my knowledge base was growing so quickly. I actually joined a whole bunch of different lodges and then found I was a legacy. My great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and now me. 5 generations of Nelsons in this one lodge in the Swiss Alps. Those are called blue lodges, and they're different than Masonry as you would understand it. They were primarily established for protecting the bloodlines of Christ. I remember it was my great-grandfather that said to Rudolf Steiner, we are no longer at war in the physical world, that if we wish to change this world, we do it by changing ourselves, and the world changes with our own vision. And that is how it works.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. So you are a Mason of the Blue Lodge?
I'm several Blue Lodges.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, well, it's just, I joined clubs. What is it? Get out of jail cards, access. You know, I was, you know, my father said it really elegantly. He said there's 3 ways to be in this world. There's the vulgar, the adept, and the exempt. And the vulgar get audited, The adept gets money back from the government, and the exempt has a 501c3. They don't pay taxes. And so you aspire toward autark, supreme individual sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And you never get there. It's a process. That's why it's part of Path 25. But that's the idea of the relationship you have with yourself. You're constantly trying to improve what you're doing, the quality of it. And really, the way you get closer to the Lord is not what you're doing, but how you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense, too. And have you, or are you familiar, you're obviously familiar with the Montauk Project, right?
Yes, that was Dr. Carl Schleicher's, because that was out of Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was, what would you like me to say about it?
Well, I'm curious because you were talking about Tantra and sexuality, and I am aware that they use the Montauk chair on a sexual level in order to create visuals by the person who is actually operating the chair and to create a reality or what I would say a false reality. Now, that's my take and my impression from people I've interviewed. What do you say about this?
Well, I don't know much about that part. What I do know is that when they do remote viewing, for example, that is not ESP, that's PK phenomena. That means something is watching you. And so if you're enhancing that with drugs, that's kind of creepy, because we already have a theorem that says the observer changes what he is observing.
Interesting.
And so if you're allowing something to observe you, and then you want to enhance it with sex or drugs, the intensity of concentration, that's the depth of hypnosis, the sheer focus of the intent. That, using sex or drugs or a number 8 flat iron skillet, all of that. How did they do it in Constantine, where they put him right through that near-death experience, where he's right there in that moment between this world and that world with electric currents crossing his heart, and all of a sudden he's in a different universe. That is Hellblazer. That is close to what it's like when you step into other worlds.
Right. What is watching you? If I can interrupt you for just a second, what exactly is the watcher watching you? I mean, what is it?
Well, yeah, the Anunnaki. There's lots of different levels of what they call the watcher of big rocks.
Well, what is observing you? Okay, say you're piercing these veils and dimensions or wherever you're doing to alter or create a rip or tear in this next dimension. What is it that they're saying something is watching you? What is it that is observing?
Well, maybe it's the ghosts of Mars. Who knows?
There is no answer. Okay.
Well, the ghosts of Mars. There are, of course, demons and angels. And demons would be lesser dimension beings like your shadow to you. It is you, but it's a projection of you into a lesser dimension, and there is a relationship between what you do and what it does. And when it tries to achieve personal power over you, well, and the same thing with an angel, it's a multi-dimension. And what made us God's favored is that we have choice. That is, the problem is making the right decision. And the fact that you do not have full disclosure would suggest that you only have true will, not free will.
That's very interesting. Well, it sounds like, an aspect of the self would be observing from another dimension. I mean, because we are multidimensional beings.
There is a larger part of self that is actually directing this show, and the ego is along for the ride. It does not, that's why I started this program, control is a fantasy. Doesn't work like that. That is a way that someone very ill would try to approach this thing in controlling you. At some point, Walmart will fail. You can just say no. And that's where the emotional and intellectual maturity start to move you toward evolution. And you reach that place of understanding that, okay, I do this in a lot of my little videos. I have 3 glasses half full of yellow liquid. And I say the first one is half full, the second one is half empty, and the third one is full of piss. And so, it's a joke. But if you look at something as half empty, it's a choice, What happens now is you're missing something, and that is going to affect your health. Whereas if something's half full, you've just been given half a glass of something.
Mm-hmm.
Everything happens for a reason. Everything leads to something better. And you have to take the responsibility for the thoughts you choose to entertain. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm. That's very true indeed. Yes. And we're getting ready to wrap this up pretty soon, but I do want to go ahead and cover your website again and anything else. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
Well, they can email. I respond to email. I respond to everybody that sends me email. I try to respond to everybody. If they get crazy, I am a little more minimalistic, but, and I have so many free writings that if you write to me, I'll give you more stuff, lots more where that came from. I've got a lot of things I've written. My website is richardallenmiller.com, and Allen is ALAN. So it's richardallenmiller.com. My books can be found at oak-publishing.com. And my email is a third website called Rick, I'm just Rick, at NW for Northwest, botanicalsplural.org, the creature under the bridge. That's NWBOTANICALS.org.
I like the creature under the bridge. That's good.
Well, that's what I am, is a big org.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I want to thank you so much for being on tonight. We still have a few minutes left here, but I just want to thank you. It's been very incredible listening to you tonight and covering all these different topics. And I don't know if I've asked you this before. I might have, but can you elaborate insofar as who your handler is or handlers?
You want to believe. You're like Mueller. Okay.
I don't want to believe anything.
Well, actually, they now refer to him as a wrangler, which is different, handling small children and animals on set. I'm a handful. And so what they do now, or my current handler, is he pretty much gets out of my way and is there to help facilitate if I need something. I have gotten to the age that pretty much what I want to do is for the greater good. I love Fuzz. Hot Fuzz. Did you ever see that movie?
No.
Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz is a must watch. It's an English comedy. And at the occult group that they're going after, that are all murderers in this occult group, is they all chant out for the greater good. It's wonderful.
After you've created all these other devices, right? In the
What's
early
that?
years. I'm just teasing. I said after you create all these other weaponized devices, no, it's for the greater good.
Just toys. Yeah, the deal is that we have a personal responsibility for what we say and what we think and what we do. And these are different layers of, taking control of what you think, and then what you say, and then what you do. And you have to take responsibility for that. And that is where evolution lies. And that is where the hope of man lies. And what happens is your children are watching you, and that's where they learn how to do it. And so it's important for you to walk as tight a walk as you can, because they're watching you, and that's how they learn how to do it. And then they teach their children, and those children are most likely going to be the ones that actually make the changes on Earth, not you or me.
Makes sense. I have a question for you. It's interesting. I was thinking about surveillance and all this NSA stuff that's going on. Yeah. But what's interesting to me, we were talking about reality and changing reality by observation for, like, say, someone observing someone else. So if they're observing, say, through the surveillance communication systems, do they change the reality of the target, which would be any civilian on the world?
Well, yeah, in that sense of it, just doing Google and Amazon profiling you, when you make an order, and you'll notice they have the next 20 things like Netflix does on what you want to watch next. How does that work?
Right. So it's almost being guided by a sort of, I wouldn't say artificial intelligence, but it's interesting because there is an observer.
You're being guided by algorithms.
Right. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of creepy.
Something to think about anyway. Do you see good things down the road here in this country?
Do I what?
Do you see anything good here in America coming down a pike anytime soon? I mean, what is your take on the pulse of America right now?
It's going downhill in a handbasket. We're ignorant, ill-informed, and complacent.
That's not easy to.
Those are the things that have to change for America right now. That's what has to happen now. And actually, everybody's waking up because guess what? Walmart is failing right now. Go Google it. Walmart failure. Check it out. It is in serious trouble, and that's just the first. Now, bad news is Russia has just formed an alliance with China against the petrodollar, and that's going to screw us up big time.
Yeah, it seems to be some. You wonder how much of that is game playing and shaking hands under the table at the same time.
Well, there's all of that, and it's transnational corporations that are running our country. You think that Obama's really a president? That's crazy. He hasn't done one single campaign promise he made. The big one that I waited for him to do was on GMO legislation for each state. That never happened. That was his big one. That's why I voted for him. Then, when he didn't do it, who am I going to vote for? Ron Paul? That's crazy.
Well, they're all puppets, if you ask me.
Well, I don't mean to say against Ron Paul. It's just get a grip. There's nothing real going on there. In fact, Nick Begich, one of my best friends, his younger brother is junior senator of Alaska, and there is a high likelihood Mark is not going to run for Congress again, because why would he want to? He can't do anything there.
Really?
Nothing's real. And that's what he said. And the last time two brothers made a run on Washington, like the Begiches, shot him.
My goodness.
The Kennedys.
Right, yeah.
His father was assassinated, with Boggs, when they gave the Alyeska pipeline to the Indians. He and the other senator never found their bodies.
Wow.
That was Nick Begich's father. And so, there's a legacy that Washington, D.C. is not what you think it is. And really, politicians, there's a website that I find I love it. It's called hangthebankers.com. And Vincent Finelli loved that so much he went out and got hangthepoliticians.com. And I don't know what he's going to do there. But hangthebankers.com is about Iceland hanging 42 of their bankers and giving the bank money back to the people holding mortgages.
That's fascinating. Well, Iceland's made some good moves, actually. Seems like Iceland has made some good moves.
Well, they're not Switzerland. That's the deal. Switzerland is no longer neutral like it, touted during World War II and in the 60s for banking. It's all changing now. And again, it's with intentionality. And I think the key is in decentralization and becoming more independent of the grid. That means, growing at least some of your own food. It doesn't mean you're growing it all, but certainly enough that you feel more secure if the grid should collapse.
Right.
What's going to happen when California no longer has any produce? All your orange crops and all your other things fail out of California. And where are they going to come from, and how much more are they going to cost? And why would you want to eat something from the Philippines? Gurdjieff, well, metaphorically and metaphysically, macrobiotics is about eating your environment. Being in harmony with the system you're living with, whether you're on the coast or, in the greens or whatever.
I'd rather grow my own food myself.
Well, yeah, and you can't, but you can absolutely grow enough to feel secure and barter what you can't grow yourself.
Right. And another thing is I've been hearing a lot about water and the privatization of water. So that could be another thing coming down the pike.
That's the other big thing. That food should be taken off the monetary system where it becomes a recreational sport like soccer. And then you would choose where you want to live by the water that's available to drink or the food that's available to eat. And that is, the old way of doing things where there's more sovereignty within your structure.
Exactly. Well, Richard, we're just about out of time here. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been an awesome, awesome interview, and I really appreciate you showing up. And thank everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you, Keith, as always. And everybody have a great week. And, of course, I guess with that being said, nothing real exists, huh, Richard?
Well, stay tuned on that.
We manifest as we go, for sure, without a doubt. Okay, everybody, have a great week.